So the basis of mitochondria has been always an energy producing organelle. But a lot of information has come in to change this view. So understanding mitochondria and its function is very important. So if you want to start at cellular health, you should start at mitochondria. Okay. So evolutionally, this is how the evolution tree looks like: archaeobacteria, cyanobacteria, eubacteria, protoplast. Then we came along, and where did actually mitochondria came from? Still debatable, but most scientists would believe that it actually eubacteria onwards is when the mitochondrial symbiotic existence, which means mitochondria, the cells were without mitochondria before this time. And so mitochondria was a separate entity in bacteria, and it was not part of the other cells. So when a symbiotic relationship was necessary, so they coexisted. So bacterial mitochondria coexisted, started living and coexisting with the rest of the evolutionary cells. So this is very important. The reason is because from an anaerobic respiration, when oxygen was used for respiration, understand two things. One is, if you want to use oxygen for respiration, you need mitochondria. So this is the first point in evolution that we need to remember. The second point is, whenever oxygen is used, you are going to create a lot of intracellular oxidative stress. This is part of living. You can't do without it. Some amount of oxidative stress is fine, which is necessary for cell signaling, but too much is not good. So nature or evolution has to come up with a program whereby the cell is protected from the oxidative stress. So the first antioxidant to protect the mitochondria and intra-oxidative cellular stress would have been glutathione. So glutathione is as important as vitamin C, the two of the most important critical antioxidants for our health. So 1.5 to 2 billion ago, mitochondria upgraded into an intracellular existence for symbiotic reasons. Because without mitochondria, there is no respiration. Okay. Now, mitochondria retain their own DNA. So they have their own mitochondrial DNA, they have their own RNA, they also have their own protein synthesis mechanism. So cells provide nutrients, those are substrates for mitochondria. Mitochondria in turn produce ATP, the energy currency for the cellular function. So if cellular function depends on energy, then you can imagine how important mitochondrial health is for us. All plants, animals, fungus have mitochondria except mature red blood cells. The reason is because hemoglobin is a large molecule. So mature red blood cells will get rid of most of the other things, and they depend mostly on glycolysis for their energy. So this is an exception. Otherwise, every cell has to have mitochondria. Now, what we would like to look at now, how we should look at cells is the intracellular organelles should be viewed as mini organs because they perform so many important functions without which there is no cellular health. And remember, when there is no dysfunctional cellular health, you have a dysfunctional organ health and system health. So it is time for us to recognize that all these intracellular organelles must be viewed as mini organs. And the most important would be mitochondria. So the justification, I'm trying to justify why mitochondria is important and the reasons behind it. Then we will look at mitochondrial dysfunction and diseases and how mitochondria is able to repair itself. We will also look at mitochondrial correction. So what can we do to keep our mitochondria healthy? So these organelles, especially mitochondria, they don't only produce ATP, but they sense the internal as well as the external cellular environment and make necessary adaptive responses and compensatory responses. So mitochondria is not just for ATP. They communicate with every other cell. That means they communicate with the rest of the body. And many of the functions are adaptive responses or compensatory responses, and mitochondria controls. So if this is the case, the organelles that work the most will suffer most wear and tear. That is the reason why mitochondrial dysfunction is common. Understanding and how to prevent and correct that is also very important. Now, each cell has hundreds of mitochondria, and they have, of course, thousands of mitochondrial DNA. Now, mitochondria, as I mentioned, specialize in energy, which is the vital force, and the nucleolus and the cytosol specialize in cellular function. So, mitochondria lie at the crossroads of sensing and integrating information from the environment to trigger what is known as adaptive and compensatory cellular response. So an adaptive response would be something like, okay, you need more protein to be synthesized. A compensatory cellular response should be to dampen the inflammation. A lot of these functions are controlled by mitochondria. Mitochondrial DNA is different compared to the cytosol DNA. Mitochondrial, it has its own DNA, as I mentioned, and mitochondrial DNA is inherited maternally, not from the father. And they are responsible for many of the functions, especially the protein synthesis. And the protein synthesis itself is controlled by ribosomes. Now, the mitochondrial DNA controls energy production, and the rest of it is controlled by the cytosol. Okay. Now, there is also uniqueness in mitochondrial DNA. Now, mitochondrial DNA is more likely to be damaged than the nuclear DNA. The reason is, one is mitochondrial DNA does not have histones. Histones are like, you know, you would have seen the DNA diagram, what the DNA chromosomes wrap around. So those histones, when it is not there, the chromosomes are laid bare, so they are more likely to be damaged by oxidative stress. So mitochondrial DNA are more likely to suffer from oxidative stress than the nuclear DNA. And mitochondrial DNA are also at very close to the electron transport system that's between the two mitochondrial membranes. So there is a lot of redox reactions that is happening. So mitochondrial DNA is also more likely to suffer from oxidative stress. The point I'm trying to make is how important antioxidants are for us, because that is where you need to start your health. Okay. Now, how important is mitochondria? Again, it is at the subcellular level that plays a vital role in cellular health. That means control, a lot of this cell communication and control comes from mitochondria, and mitochondrial dysfunction is increasingly recognized as the link to many of the disorders which we will see, including cancers. Okay. Now, I will mention the mitochondrial diseases, but specifically I'll explain why it is linked to cancer. So if you understand mitochondrial dysfunction is linked to cancer, not so much genetic, you will understand how important mitochondria is for us. So life, we exist because of energy. So life means your anatomy plus energy that you produce in the cell and the information that is conveyed or the communication that is given out to the rest of the cells. So you look at this part, you have this, without energy, there is no cellular communication. Okay. Now, once energy was available, only then development was possible. Development in the sense that evolutionarily, we started to have multicellularity. That means you have multicellular functions, and then these cells had to be organized and they have to be compartmentalized. So this is how your cellular from cellular evolution, it became your organs and then it became the system. So unless energy was available abundantly, this multicellularity, organization and compartmentalization of functions, physiological functions and biochemical functions would not have been possible. So the point I'm making here is it all boils down to energy. If you look at traditional practices, yoga, tai chi, qigong, sun gazing, all these practices focus on energy. But of course, the explanation was not from mitochondrial point of view, but people understood this many centuries ago. Yeah. So energy is very important, and energy is also very important for communication. Unless there is proper communication, there cannot be a healthy system. You need to have good communication. Now, I have always mentioned about treating the underlying cause of the diseases for healing, because basically, let me repeat again, we must be healers. We are not here to suppress the symptoms or control the symptoms and give people pseudo happiness and pseudo health that shouldn't exist in medical practice. But if you want to achieve these, then the root cause, you must be able to find out what else or where else the communication is going from the root cause. Okay, so you may have one root cause. The root cause can communicate with many other organs. You will also have to think about all this. All this boils down to still cellular energy. Another way of looking at energy and us is to be alive means you are animated with energy. To dead means there is no energy. So when ATP ceases to exist or it has declined significantly, three things can happen. One is if it is excessively low or nil, the cell will die. If it is significantly low ATP, then the cell may undergo dormant status. If it persists to be low, then there is a possibility of malignant transformation. So in the cells, there is a function called retrograde signaling, RTG. Now what it means is if there is a dysfunctional state, okay, the cell will adapt itself to function at a higher level. So this should be a temporary phenomenon. So the cell is able to overcome the temporary setback in cellular health. But if this persists, say you have a dysfunctional mitochondria, and if this retrograde sensing persists, pushing the mitochondria to function at a higher level continuously, a lot of cellular dysfunction and cancer formation, malignant transformation can happen. So at all times, say supposing you are working out and twice a week or three times a week, you want to go full blast. That is RTG. Your mitochondria will set itself to perform at a higher level for the short period of time. Subsequently, your diet, your lifestyle, your antioxidant intake must be enough to repair so that the mitochondria settles down to its healthy state of function. If you allow it to persist, then it becomes a dysfunctional status. Okay. So loss of energy is the hallmark of aging. It's very simple. Most of us don't have enough energy as we age, and this is ATP. This is cellular energy. And essentially, it's also the hallmark for all chronic diseases, especially neurodegenerative diseases, cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and many other diseases, as we will see. So in the cell ATP, this is all of you all should be aware of this. You have ATP, and most of the ATP, at least 90%, is produced in the mitochondria through oxidative phosphorylation. That means substrates are transferred into the mitochondria, and oxygen is used for the oxidative phosphorylation, and at the end is the product ATP. About 10% or less of the cellular energy comes from glycolysis in the cytoplasm, which is actually fermentation. Now, if this is reversed, when there is more fermentation in the cell, then it can lead to cellular damage, including nuclear DNA mutation as well as malignant transformation. Okay. So in order to protect this oxidative phosphorylation and maintain the mitochondria in a healthy state, evolutionarily glutathione became very necessary. And just for discussion purposes, all of you should know glutathione itself is produced only in the cytoplasm, not in the mitochondria. It has to be transported into the mitochondria, for which again you need cellular health. So even if you produce glutathione in the cell, you must maintain mitochondrial health as well. Okay. So mitochondrial energy and aging, the DNA replication over time. So I mentioned to you about RTG status. If you continue this status for long, so the repeated mitochondrial DNA replication over time can cause chromosomal aberrations. It can also shift the energy formation from oxidative phosphorylation to cytoplasmic glycolysis, and this will be a decrease in energy. So even if 5% of cellular energy is decreased, it can result in premature aging and diseases. So this is in a cell that has got decreased energy. So it is going to be either dead or dormant. But when there is a nuclear DNA mutation and it results in malignant transformation or tumorigenesis, then they have their own mechanisms to upgrade the ATP from glycolysis. That means a cell will use so much of glucose to keep producing ATP in the cytoplasm. That is malignancy initiation. So this is how cancer is formed. So the energy is shifted from mitochondria to cytoplasm, and there is a lot of fermentation, and you get also a lot of lactic acid. So you have to, if you want to prevent this, then the primary focus should be where? It's in the mitochondria. And the amount of energy you create depends on this enzyme called ATPase. Yeah. So it's like an enzyme that spins. So you can have a healthy spin. Sometimes you need more energy, so you can have faster spinning of the ATPase so that you can produce more energy. So what helps is, of course, hydrogen. We all know it's necessary. Water, fasting. Why is because when you fast, you give the body an opportunity to repair and regenerate, and the body will sense that it needs energy, not for metabolism, but to repair and regenerate. So the ATPase will still spin faster. So this is one of the benefits of regular fasting. So I'll cover some of how you can do the fasting in the discussion on mitochondrial biogenesis. And the supplements that can actually help in generating more ATP would be ubiquinol, CoQ10, the reduced form ubiquinol, and magnesium. Now, magnesium, we will look at it, it's poorly recognized as one of the critical nutrients for mitochondrial energy. And of course, if you have free radicals, if you have refined and fast foods, let me mention it again. I'll keep mentioning this again and again. When you burn glucose for energy, you produce smoke, which we call as reactive oxygen species, RNS, reactive nitrogen species. These are called oxidative stress agents, okay? And so these free radicals, when you eat a high carbohydrate diet, you will have abundance of free radicals. Because glucose, when it is burned, it creates free radicals more than anything else, any other substrates. So the ones who have less damage or less mitochondrial dysfunctions are the ones who are on low carbohydrate diet and those who regularly fast. Simple diet and lifestyle changes. So the more carbs you eat, choose the carbs that you can eat, avoid the carbs as much as you can, Avoid the carbs means especially sugar, refined foods, and fast foods. They're all full of sugar. So because they create a lot of oxidative stress to mitochondria. So this is the reason why you can see earlier onset of diseases and a lot of premature aging. So this is, it's, you know, the diet that we eat seems to be unavoidable for most, but you have to make a choice. Even the newborn, when the baby is bottle fed, you're already feeding sugar. Can you imagine what's going to happen to the mitochondria? Heavy water. I have some slides on heavy water, chemicals, pesticides, and drugs. Now, these are especially lipophilic, and a lot of chemical drugs are also amphiphilic. That means they're both water soluble and fat soluble. And remember, mitochondria has two layers of fat, bilipid membrane. Now, because it's very high in lipid content, any drug or chemical or pesticide that is lipid soluble has a high tendency of accumulating in the mitochondria. So we are living in a toxic world. Even Roundup has not been totally banned and abandoned. There's still so much that's being used. So every day when you are loaded with chemicals, and there are many of the chronic diseases are treated with drugs, mitochondrial dysfunction is inevitable. One of the reasons why drugs have so much of side effects, and they usually, when you treat a disease with a drug, you end up treating another disease because of the complications with more drugs, is because of mitochondrial dysfunction, because they accumulate in the mitochondrial membrane. And mitochondrial membrane controls, it's like a matrix that controls electron flow so that you generate ATP. If the mitochondrial membrane is damaged, then you have a leaky membrane, so you have leakage of electrons. So there is less ATP and more oxidative stress and more heat that is produced. So that will cause mitochondrial damage. Okay. And of course, heavy metals. So why in this world we have so much of problems with heavy metals? Because dentists still don't give up doing filling with amalgams. We doctors have been molded to think that vaccine will save everybody. Sadly, more is coming. Please do not, okay, please think it over very carefully before you take vaccines. Please think it over very carefully, okay? There are many reasons why vaccines are bad for us, but especially because they contain either aluminium or mercury. And no, okay, now we evolved from bacteria, okay? And then many of them are photosynthetic, okay? The question is, are we photosynthetic as well? If you look down at mitochondria and the evolution and the functions, it looks like we are photosynthetic. That means you have to live with nature and natural light. That's the sunlight. This is why traditionally in many cultures, sun gazing, sun basing, sun yoga has been always advocated, because light is very important. I think I have some slides on our retina, which has got lots of mitochondria. So since it is probably from eukaryotic origin, can it be controlled by light? It looks like it can be controlled by light. Yeah. For those of you who want to find out more information about blue light and how you protect yourself by wearing the goggles, Baljit will be a good person. You all can pose your questions. He is very well read about blue light and its effects. So blue light, which comes a lot nowadays from phones and all these gadgets and electromagnetic field radiations, they have a tendency to actually affect the retinal mitochondria, and thereby also they reduce the production of melatonin at night and your cortisol in the morning, next morning. So everything goes haywire. So you lose your circadian rhythm. So light is important because we evolved with light, photosynthesis, okay? But the blue light, especially when it is exposed for longer period of time, causes mitochondrial dysfunction. So looking at mitochondria and antioxidants, one of the first antioxidant that would have evolved along with mitochondria should have been glutathione for the reasons that I've mentioned. Now, why we know this is glutathione deficiency leads to widespread mitochondrial damage. For those who are deficient, the first sign of replacement would be an improvement in energy and sleep. So if you want to look at mitochondrial health, optimizing antioxidants is critical, okay? Because of the reasons I mentioned. Mitochondrial DNA is more likely to be damaged, and the diet and lifestyle, diet with high carbohydrates. Except for genetic mitochondrial diseases, most of these mitochondrial dysfunction diseases do not exist as independent entities. They're all linked to either your food, your lifestyle, exposure to blue light, deficiency in antioxidants, or you are toxic with pesticides, drugs, or ionizing radiation. So the mitochondrial genetic problem is not so common. It's rare. But as an obstetrician, this is what I've been always telling my patients. We label many of the diseases as genetic origin, especially cancer. What I've always told my patients is this: even if you find a genetic cause in the newborn, it would have started from the parents, either because of their diet or their lifestyle or their environmental factor. So take, for example, many of these, a lot of congenital deformities, especially atresia and dysplasias, are caused by hypothyroidism in the mother. Okay? So hypothyroidism affects AMPK, and AMPK level affects mitochondria. So there is always a link. And so what I'm trying to say is that we shouldn't just push everything under the carpet with the reason of genetic problems and try not to deal with it. So there's a lot of understanding that has to take place, that genetic can play a small role. It's not that it is not contributing to diseases at all. It does, but in a very small percentage. The environment controls the genetic expression. In the last 50 years, if you look at 50 years or even 100 years, if you look at the genetic abnormalities, variants, that it has not increased, but the type of diseases and the severity of diseases, early onset of diseases and premature aging has increased a lot. And all this starts at the cellular level. That's why this whole series is called a cellular aging. Okay. So healthy cytoplasm means healthy mitochondria, because you have to have GSH production in the cytoplasm. Now remember, I mentioned about glutathione, which is very important. Equally important is your vitamin C level, because vitamin C, we will look at it, it gets into the mitochondria very easily, and it can also regenerate the glutathione. So the traditional view, as I mentioned, is ATP production. Now let's look at the recent evidences that show mitochondria plays many other roles. Mitochondria is very essential in cell signaling and messaging through reactive oxygen species. Now, cell signaling through ROS means the function of a cell and the balance in the cellular function, you need a certain amount of oxidative stress, both ROS and RNS. When there is deficiency in antioxidant, or there is a high carbohydrate consumption, for example, when these ROS and RNS exceed certain level, only then the dysfunction and cellular damage happens. So mitochondria actually signals and controls the amount of ROS that is necessary for repair and regeneration. So not all oxidative stress is bad, it is necessary. This is how, for example, you kill cancer cells and the pathogens. It is necessary. And mitochondria also buffer calcium levels. So you heard Thomas Levy mentioning the other day that higher levels of intracellular calcium is extremely toxic. What we need is magnesium and not so much of calcium and mitochondria. If we want to balance these, then the cell membrane needs a lot of energy to actively transport magnesium in and calcium out. So mitochondria is important to buffer calcium levels. It regulates apoptosis. So coming back to cell signaling and messaging through ROS, mitochondria can signal apoptosis. That means when the energy level in the cell has dropped, then the signal is induced for the cell to undergo programmed death or apoptosis. Persistence of these damaged cells can contribute to cancer. But at the same time, if mitochondria is dysfunctional and there is a lot of oxidative stress and you are deficient in antioxidants, too much of apoptosis will cause excessive cell death and early organ failure and organ death. So either way, it has to be balanced. And this fine balance, fine tuning is by mitochondria. It is also involved in iron metabolism and heme synthesis, as well as steroid synthesis. So mitochondria is not just about ATP. Recent evidence, mitochondrial stress releases mitochondrial peptides that regulate stress response. So if you say, for example, if somebody is on a high carbohydrate diet or someone who loves sugar, if you check their cortisol level or if you ask questions about how they handle stress, they are usually poor stress handlers. Mitochondrial dysfunction will reduce your ability to handle stress. Okay? They also regulate inflammation and they protect against age-related diseases. So these are all the recent evidence about mitochondria, why we need to look after mitochondria. That is probably where I will start health from. Mitochondrial peptides, there are also other types of peptides, mitochondrial unfolded protein response peptides that regulates cellular response to stress. So it becomes cytoprotective. There is another peptide called mitochondria danger associated molecular pattern. It's called DAN. This is for completion's sake. Even if you don't remember the names, just remember they regulate how you manage your stress, how the cells respond to stress, and they also regulate how you respond, how much of inflammation that goes on in the body and the inflammatory diseases that come along with that. So this is a diagram. So these are all the peptides that I mentioned, a couple of peptides. So if you have any one of these, DAMs or the UPR or other forms of peptides, then it can induce metabolic changes and cell stress response. And cell stress response can also result in excessive inflammation in the body. These are also another diagrammatic way of looking at how these peptides regulate cellular health. So these new evidences show that, our focus should shift from, as we have always said, from organ health to cellular health. Mitochondria and apoptosis is activated by both intrinsic and extrinsic way. Defective apoptosis leads to diseases of excessive growth. For example, cancer, atherosclerosis, Alzheimer's with all the plaques. Now, if you remove the aged cells in a programmed, timely way, then those cells can actually undergo autophagy as well, and you will reuse the cell organelles. So you are actually regenerating. Leaving the damaged cells without apoptosis will cause a lot of problems of excessive growth. Mitochondria actually decides how this intrinsic pathway works, and how does this apoptosis through mitochondria comes about is by activation of AMPK. Okay. Now, so the if you look at signaling molecules, there are two signaling molecules that are very important for mitochondrial health. One is mTOR, we will look at it. The other is AMPK. Too much of mTOR, too little of AMPK results in mitochondrial dysfunction. And so why do we get too much of mTOR? One simple reason is consuming too much of protein, especially when we age. So now let's look at mitochondrial dysfunction and diseases. It can be because of faulty electrical and chemical transmembrane potential. I mentioned that mitochondrial membrane is a bilipid layer, and you have the space in between where a lot of electron exchange takes place. And this membrane is made of lipid, especially it's the cardiolipin. And this is where the substrates are burned or metabolized to create ATP. So if there is any fault in the electrical or chemical aspect of the membrane, then it will result in mitochondrial dysfunction, which will lead to many types of diseases. You can also have an alteration in the electron transport chain, either because of excessive oxidative stress or because of deficiency in substrates that we will see. Reduction of critical metabolites. Say if you are low in essential fatty acids, if you are low in ubiquinone, if you are low in magnesium, these are all substrates that are necessary for mitochondrial health. So under mitochondrial discussion, there is a long list of what you can take to improve mitochondrial discussion, but some of the important substrates and nutrients will be covered. So mitochondrial diseases can be inherited or genetic, but this is a small portion, as I mentioned. Actually, if you have a better preconception health, even this can be avoided to a large extent. It can be mutations. Again, most of the mutations come from oxidative stress. Now, mitochondrial DNA mutations will result in nuclear DNA mutation. Okay? Or it can be acquired. Most of this will be an acquired or mutation. Acquired, the reasons are either because of the diet that I mentioned, or insufficient substrate levels, insufficient antioxidants, or you are exposed to too much of environmental pollutions, chemicals, and drugs. This will all fall under the acquired group. So defective mitochondria in muscles and CNS present as more severe diseases, because that's where you see a lot of mitochondria. So we have seen mitochondrial mutation. Now mitochondrial dysfunction, they acquire poor lifestyle. One of the factor is sleep. Majority are sleeping late. There is no repair or very little repair and regeneration, very little antibody production, very little antioxidant production. If you do not respect your circadian rhythm, there is a time you sleep, there is a time you wake up. The earlier you go to bed, the earlier you wake up, the more sun exposure you get, the healthier you will be. Smoking is another lifestyle that causes a lot of oxidative stress to mitochondrial health. Diet is carbohydrates, carbohydrates, carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates are fine, that you find in vegetables. Refined carbohydrates, refined gluten, sugar, they are especially damaging. Chronic infections cause a lot of oxidative stress. Thomas Levy gave a very clear understanding of where your chronic infections can be. Usually it's in the oral cavity or the sinuses or the GIT. Now, this is usually, they can be also very silent, but infections cause a lot of oxidative stress, and according to Thomas, which I'll agree, a lot of our oxidative stress next to diet and lifestyle can come from these silent infections. environmental toxins, heavy metals, which I've already mentioned, if adverse effects of drugs. So when you have acquired causes, when you have excessive of these causes, what does it result is its oxidative stress to mitochondria. So mitochondria is unique in the sense that it is exposed to a lot of both reactive oxygen species and reactive nitrogen species. And that results in damage to cellular lipids, proteins, and DNA. It also leads to mitochondrial leak. So you will have leakage of protons into the ETC, the space between the two membranes. And that can actually increase the production of oxidative stress. So there will be more oxygen consumption to compensate for the leak and to produce ATP. When you use more oxygen, you create a further increase in oxidative stress. So this becomes a vicious cycle, and then the end result is reduced ATP. So remember, antioxidants can be very, very protective, and you just have to choose the right. So mitochondrial lipids, especially cardiolipin, needs mentioning. It is an important inner mitochondrial membrane phospholipid, highly sensitive to ROS and RNS insults, and that will result in leakage of the membranes, which is not good. Cardiolipin is also an important component of the electron transport chain and provides stability to cytochrome and enzyme complexes. So it's just like your cell membrane, which has got a lot of phospholipids. In the mitochondria, you have this special form of phospholipid, which is called cardiolipin. So if you want to protect the cardiolipin, then you need antioxidants, and phospholipids would be a good nutrient to add. So we look at antioxidants. You have endogenous antioxidant. That means this is what we are gifted with. All of them would be intracellular. Glutathione peroxidase enzyme, catalase enzyme, superoxide oxide dismutase, and NRF2. There's a small difference between glutathione and vitamin C. Now, glutathione actually in a big way protects mitochondria. It recycles vitamin C. Vitamin C in turn recycles glutathione, and it also protects mitochondria. But glutathione is able to activate the NRF2 antioxidant system, which then will activate the catalase and superoxide dismutase. You know, catalase hydrolyzes the hydrogen peroxide to water and oxygen, and superoxide dismutase will actually catalyze the reaction of reactive oxygen species. So it's superoxide anion, which is the highly toxic form of oxidative stress agent. So these are the endogenous antioxidants. You also need exogenous antioxidants like vitamin C, and that is ubiquitous. Vitamin E, because it is a fat-soluble antioxidant. Alpha lipoic acid, which is also a fat-soluble as well as a water-soluble antioxidant. So mitochondrial dysfunction and diseases, the more intense and energy is required from an organ, the more likely it is to suffer from dysfunction and disease. So this is why mitochondrial dysfunction associated diseases are more common in muscles, brain, liver, kidneys, and neurons. And these are all the organs that will also require a lot more antioxidants than other organs. Some of the diseases, the list is very long. Neuropsychiatric disorders, there is plenty of evidence that you all can search. Autism, ADHD, schizophrenia, bipolar diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, etc. Cardiomyopathy and CCF. Now look at CCF, for example. The conventional treatment does not address ATP, which is actually very sad. a congestive heart failure, which means it has failed to perform its function. The function to pump the blood out, and that needs energy. If that is not addressed, then it becomes an irreversible disease. So it is a typical example of energy deficiency associated diseases. So cardiomyopathy, CCF, and myopathy. There is a very interesting article in Cell Metabolism. I think it's in June this year, just a month ago, that niacin given 1 gram a day would help significantly in mitochondrial myopathy. And of course, it can also affect your liver, your kidney, your immune system. Immune system is another system that requires a lot of energy because they work 24/7. Any organ, any cell that is 24/7 will require a lot of energy, and they also require a lot of antioxidants. And of course, you can also see an increased risk of diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular diseases, and there will be more premature aging, accelerated aging, more autoimmune diseases, GIT disorders. Fatigue is very common as a mitochondrial dysfunction disorder, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia. So very little attention is paid to mitochondrial dysfunction as a very important factor in all these diseases. We will look at cancers, how mitochondrial dysfunction leads to tumorigenesis, chronic infections, decreased loss of muscle strength, loss of control, and pain can also be associated with mitochondrial dysfunction. Swallowing difficulties. This was interesting when I was putting up a slide. So I had a patient who can't swallow. She came to me with lung cancer about 2.5 years ago, primary, secondary in the brain. She took a few courses of chemo and she felt very, very sick. Since then, she has been on the integrative medical care treatment that I usually offer. And she has done well. She's well and healthy. But one problem she always has is swallowing difficulty. So she finds it difficult to swallow tablets. And I know one of the important reasons for swallowing difficulty, especially in the morning, is hypothyroidism, low thyroid hormone. So when I was preparing this lecture, I noticed that swallowing difficulty can also be because of mitochondrial dysfunction or loss of cellular energy, decrease in energy. So I've informed the husband to read about cell energy, and one of the nutrients that can actually improve would be AMP. Respiratory complications, poor growth and developmental delays, again associated with hypothyroidism. They could be linked, and skeletal muscle abnormalities. Another typical feature of loss of energy is lack of endurance. Of course, from hormone point of view, you will consider thyroid and testosterone. Poor balance, again, loss of energy and strength. There can also be more epilepsy, visual and hearing disorders. Visual disorders, not surprising because retina is very, very rich in mitochondria. Lactic acidosis. Actually, I told you about RTG, right? So if you are on endurance training, or if you have a full blast workout, you won't be able to produce all the energy that you require from oxidative phosphorylation. Once that is over, that means your substrates you have used up. The rest of the energy will come from lactic acidosis. That's one of the reasons, besides magnesium deficiency, why you get cramps and muscle soreness. So when the mitochondria is healthy, it will reverse itself to oxidative phosphorylation and energy creation. That means you recover faster. If you have mitochondrial dysfunction, besides other reasons like your testosterone deficiency and thyroid hormone deficiency, deficiency, you will have more muscle soreness. Post-exercise recovery will be slow. So keep that in mind. If you exercise and if you have muscle soreness or if your recovery is slow, besides the hormones, consider mitochondrial dysfunction as well. And mitochondrial dysfunction will be associated with immune deficiency. This is a diagrammatic review of what I've mentioned. Most of this, but this is linked to psychiatric disorders. Now, interestingly, many of these psychiatric disorders were managed very well with niacin. As early as, I think, in 1940s, Abraham Hoffer. So I believe he was a lawyer, but somehow he's a genius of a man. He understood things better than doctors. So he was one of the person who was behind food fortification of thiamine, with thiamine for beriberi and also niacin. So he had the link, he found the link niacin with psychiatric disorders, especially schizophrenia. So he gave them very high doses, but nobody would believe. So he went on to become an MD, a doctor, and he can prescribe niacin, and many of the people believed in him. But unfortunately, it's not talked about. So why niacin especially helps in psychiatric disorders? If you connect energy disorder as one of the reasons for neuropsychiatric disorders, then niacin is very important for mitochondrial health. So the long list of mitochondrial dysfunction and the type of diseases you can get, we can't go into the details of every disease. What I want to share today with you is mitochondrial dysfunction, mitochondrial DNA mutations because of the dysfunction and oxidative damage that leads to carcinogenesis or cancer formation or tumorigenesis, any way you want to call it. Basically, mitochondria is defective, so it's not able to support the energy production through oxidative phosphorylation. So there is a shift to cellular cytoplasmic glycolysis. So this shift and the signaling, poor cellular signaling, will result in cytoplasmic nuclear DNA mutation. And this nuclear DNA mutation will then shift the focus of the energy production to cytoplasm. So there is from pyruvate, instead of going through the Krebs cycle to create acetyl-CoA and energy, you have pyruvate to lactic acid. So this is the initiation, the first stage of cancer formation. So when cancer is, when there is malignant transformation, mitochondrial DNA mutation results in nuclear DNA mutation that results in the shift in the energy formation. But cancer cells, of course, they still need energy. They still need a lot of ATP. So they make a lot of ATP. Although through fermentation, the amount of ATP you produce is very little, as I mentioned, but they require, because of the excessive growth, they require a lot of ATP. And this is the reason why cancer cells take up so much more glucose than normal cells. And this is the reason why a low carbohydrate diet protects you against not only mitochondrial dysfunction, especially from cancer. And this is the first change in the diet that you should give to a cancer patient. A keto diet, but some of us don't offer advise keto diet for prolonged period. Initially, maybe keto diet, 0 carbs, and then a very low carbohydrate diet, because you want to break the chain. So cancer cells will actually shift the energy production from mitochondria to cytoplasm. So the aerobic glycolysis, as I mentioned, is a conversion to lactic acid. Traditional view that you must have a genetic origin. So most of the treatment, cancer treatment, is based on this theory that cancer is largely a genetic disease. because the nuclear DNA is defective, or it has mutated, or you see aberrations. Okay, but the link was not established that it's the mitochondria that actually causes, through cell signaling, causes nucleus DNA mutation. So the view was held, and even now this is still the strongest view, but the current view shows evidence that the origin of cancer in most cases could be the mitochondrial dysfunction. So now cancer is viewed as a mitochondrial metabolic disease. So you still need to correct the mitochondrial function if you want to fight cancer. So why we say this, there is evidence is, if you read the cancer origin book by Thomas Seyfried, as well as articles from Michael Gonzalez, who was our first speaker in this webinar series, there is a nuclear cytoplasm transfer experiment, which means you can take cytoplasm and the nucleus from a cancer cell, then you take cytoplasm and nucleus from a normal cell. So when you transfer the nucleus from a cancer cell into a normal cell, okay? Now the thinking of cancer now, all the treatment that has been designed to treat cancer is based on this genetic theory. That means it is because of nucleus DNA mutations or aberrations, okay? So in which case, if this is true, when you take the nucleus of the cancer cell and transfer it into a healthy cell, it should induce cancer, correct? But it does not induce cancer when you transfer nucleus. However, when you transfer the cytoplasm, which is the mitochondria, the cancer cell cytoplasm can induce malignant transformation in a normal cell or healthy cell. So where is the evidence? Is it nucleus or mitochondria? Okay. Now this is first part of the experiment. The second part of the experiment, you take the nucleus and the cytoplasm from a healthy cell. So you transfer the nucleus of a healthy cell into the cancer cell, and the cancer still grows. If you take healthy mitochondria from the cytoplasm of the healthy cell and put it into cancer cell, the cancer's growth stops. So this is the evidence to show that the origin of cancer is very likely to be a mitochondrial metabolic cause rather than a genetic cause. So if any one of us want to prevent cancer, any one of us want to help cancer patients, this is your focus. Yeah. So this is what I was trying to tell you just now. So this is a cell. You take, this is a normal cell, cancer cell. You take the cytoplasm and nucleus. If you transfer, it won't cause any change. Sorry, it's the other part is not there. But as I've explained, healthy mitochondria can suppress cancer cell. Nucleus does not. So everything is controlled by the mitochondria. Oh, sorry, there is a typo error. It's supposed to be magnesium. Okay. Another reason for initiation of mitochondrial dysfunction and cancer formation could be the amount of calcium in the cell, because calcium and magnesium, these two, especially the ratio, are the primary regulators of intracellular oxidative stress. And we know that intracellular oxidative stress causes mitochondrial dysfunction. So this is why when you have excessive intake of calcium. Now calcium is a supplement that is very easy to get from diet. So we don't recommend. I actually even before I started integrative medicine and prescribing lots of supplements. Uh, for some reason, I was never attracted towards calcium and iron in pregnancy also, because unless it's deficient, I never used to prescribe. So after learning integrative medicine, whenever I see a low calcium, my pen, I don't start writing a calcium prescription. I stopped. The reason is because if I correct the vitamin D3 level and the magnesium levels, then the calcium level regulates itself. So basically, if you have women who are taking calcium supplements, it is going to increase your intracellular oxidative stress. And that is not good for your cellular health, especially in connection to cancer, because it is still oxidative stress. So if you remember the cancer initiation, you also got to link it with excessive amount of intracellular calcium. And the same thing goes for iron. I mentioned to you about two of the signaling molecules. One is mTOR and the other is AMPK. Now, if your mTOR is hyperphosphorylated, that means you activate basically both the TOC1 and TOC2, they inhibit mitophagy. For some of you who are new or who are not used to these terms, mitophagy is, okay, what is autophagy? Autophagy is self-eating. That means you eat your own cells and use all the components and recycle new cells. So this is what fasting does to you. This is why fasting is so beneficial. Mitophagy is an autophagy of mitochondria. So old mitochondria are actually broken down and reassembled to form new mitochondria. Now, if you have hyperphosphorylation of mTOC, then you reduce the mitophagy. So you don't recycle. So you leave behind damaged or dysfunctional mitochondria. And I've mentioned to you that persistence or presence of excessive amounts of damage or dysfunctional mitochondria can not only lead to many of the diseases, but also to cancer. So you have a lot of accumulation of damaged mitochondria. There will be more oxidative stress, and mTOC inhibits autophagy because it inhibits the autophagy proteins. So when you have excessive or hyperphosphorylation of mTOC, your autophagy and mitophagy will be affected. Okay, and we know that it is also associated with autism and Down syndrome. Now, if you look at Atkins diet, a high protein diet, that was the fashion and people wanted to lose weight and celebrities. But many of them had the problem because high protein intake activates or hyperphosphorylates mTOC. And aging also, there's a shift. So when you are aging, it's especially important to manage your protein intake. Yeah, and it is better to have a more active AMPK than mTOC. Coming to some of the factors that cause mitochondrial dysfunction, besides oxidative stress, calcium, activation of mTOC through a high protein diet is blue light. Now there are slides which the recording in the slides all will be sent to you all. Basically, we are exposing ourselves, especially our children, to blue light because too much of a prolonged period of exposure is not good, especially at night because it disturbs your circadian rhythm, melatonin synthesis, cortisol production in the morning. So many of these people who use a lot of handphones and gadgets who are exposed to blue light, they have insomnia, sleep problems. They also can have depression. And if you look at them the next morning, in the morning, instead of being energetic and vibrant, they are half-dead people. There is lack of energy, lack of zest in life, lack of interest, and they are sleepy and tired, moody, irritable, and they come to alive towards the evening part of it. And that again goes on. So this is disturbance in the circadian rhythm. So what needs to be produced in the morning in the form of hormones, you don't produce. So you need to take care of excessive exposure to blue light because it can lead to mitochondrial dysfunction and many of the diseases that I mentioned, including macular degeneration and cataract. So why it's important is because retina is the only part, retina and the eyes, only part of the central nervous system that is exposed to light. And the retinal axons are also unmyelinated, which means they are more likely to be damaged. So once you have the blue light that impinge on the axon of the mitochondria, a lot of damage happens in the neurons as well as the ganglion cells. Okay. Now mitochondria also, because of this, the mitochondria has got another unique property. It has got a lot more cytochrome P450. Why is this important is when you have P450, they're supposed to be detoxifying the chemical agents, and there can be a lot of intermediate toxins which are even more toxic than the primary toxin itself. Mitochondrial chromosomes, including the P450 and the flavin constituents, absorb blue light. So you are not only damaging the mitochondria, and you're also creating more toxic intermediaries. So the blue light is especially very damaging, and they can also cause oxidative stress. Recent evidence, excessive exposure to blue light increases oxidative stress. They can cause serious damage to photoreceptors, and they cause glaucoma and disturb your circadian rhythm. You can wear barrier filters. I saw this question was posed to Baljit in the SAHAMM chat group, and he recommended where to buy. I think it's from online. For you all can check with him, or you post your question to the chat group again. Okay. Now, blue light also causes stress response that mitochondria senses, and it can result in premature aging, insulin resistance, insomnia, cancers, and chronic degenerative diseases. Basically because it affects your energy production. Now, deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen. It's heavy. It's twice as heavy as hydrogen. This is if it is, you have it as heavy water. Why this is important is because this is the problem that we are exposed to now. It can cause mitochondrial stress and dysfunction that leads to reduced ATP. So it can also lead to bipolar disorders. The reason why, one of the reasons why a ketone diet helps in epilepsy, it could be because ketones decrease heavy water or the deuterium in the brain. So where do you get deuterium is a lot of carbohydrates, especially the chemicals used to refine the sugar. Proteins from animals that are fed on grains and soy. That's why shifting towards a more vegetarian diet is good. Photosynthesis, that means plants and the rest of the vegetables we should be eating, reduce heavy water levels, and generally green vegetables have lower heavy water. GMO foods, sugar in feeds have high levels of heavy deuterium, and perhaps reheating boiled water. One of the reasons why you can get. How do you reduce the deuterium or the heavy water? You can drink heavy water, deuterium depleted water. It is distilled water, rain, or glacier water. This is why we all know glacier water is good. Exercise and oxygen. fasting, especially dry fasting, sunlight and grounding, which I've already mentioned before, a diet which is high in vegetables, sprouts, low carb, high fat, and moderate protein. So how do you diagnose mitochondrial dysfunction? You can take muscle samples. Usually this is not done. You can also have southern, not sorry, it's again spelling mistake. It should be southern blot. PCR and specific mutation analysis or sequencing. This is all mostly for research purposes. The indirect way of assessing mitochondrial dysfunction and damage would be to check your oxidized DNA levels. 8-hydroxy deoxyguanosine, that is a urine test. You can also look at oxidized markers like oxidized LDL, indirect way. Okay. Now we come to mitochondrial correction. So I have some slides. It's not, it doesn't cover everything that we can do, but the main points will be mentioned. Now understand that mitochondria is very dynamic because they constantly undergo change in size and number. So whatever you need has to be on a regular basis. Two, it can undergo fission and fusion. Fission means one mitochondria dividing into two, and fusion means two mitochondria joining to become a larger one. But of course, if you have too much of fission or too much of fusion, they are not good because they are all is a loss of balance. So in mitochondria health, first, if you want to correct mitochondria, you must understand how mitochondrial biogenesis or creation of new mitochondria takes place. So one is by fusion, the other is by fission, and the third is by mitophagy, where the cellular components are reused. Okay. Now remember I mentioned about AMPK that regulates mitochondrial biogenesis. So this is how a fission and fusion will look like. One becoming two, two joining to become one. So mitochondrial biogenesis, that means you create new mitochondria. They are enhanced by sirtuins in the red wine or resveratrol, AMPK, metformin, and fasting. You have to look at other factors, especially exercise, because when you have put demand on your cells to produce energy, then there is mitochondrial biogenesis. So sedentary lifestyle, there is no stimulus for biogenesis. Oxidative stress has to be managed. Temperature, cold temperature, exposure to cold temperature induces mitochondrial biogenesis. This is why traditionally in many cultures, cold shower is always encouraged. But what do we do now? Every bathroom is fitted with water heater. So we all enjoy our dips in hot saunas or, not sauna, hot tubs, bathe in hot water. You expose yourself to cold water, it is good for your mitochondria. And of course, calorie restriction. Exercise is very important, as I mentioned. Can you, which is healthier, a pigeon which is smaller or a chicken which is bigger? A pigeon which is smaller, because it exercises flapping its wings much more than a chicken, they have a lot more mitochondria. So this is very important for those people who love their sedentary lifestyle, especially after the MCO. Some of us will continue to be enjoying this layback lifestyle. Intermittent fasting, water fasting. Now there is a difference between a low carb diet and intermittent fasting. My advice to my patients, other than cancer patients, I put them on keto diet initially, would be a low carb diet. I advise them to the type of carbs that is okay to be taken and the type of carbs that should be avoided, and then ask them to do intermittent fasting. And I'll tell them slowly move into 8 by 16. That means 8 hours of eating, 16 hours of not eating, but they can drink. So when you do this, and you can also choose to do on a weekly basis or 2-3 days in a month, just do water fasting. Now this mechanism, this way of change in diet, in your diet and lifestyle, induces mitochondrial biogenesis and improves your mitochondrial health significantly, because you reduce the creation of too much of oxidative stress in the mitochondria. So have intermittent fasting or regular fasting, water fasting, as part of your lifestyle. So what else can be used for mitochondrial correction? Glutathione, evolutionarily the first antioxidant, can only be synthesized intracellularly. This is why you need the amino acids to be transported into the cell, not the glutathione molecule itself, because there is a pressure gradient. There is a minimum pressure that the cell allows amino acids to be transported into the cell. It does not allow so much of glutathione to be transported. And because it needs the raw materials, because the enzymes are inside the cell, it's better to take the amino acids and have adequate or optimize your glutathione levels. So this is why we call this as a master antioxidant. Decreased glutathione synthesis means increased intra-oxidative stress. You have a decrease in detoxification capacity. I mentioned to you just now that environmental toxins, drugs, pesticides, chemicals put a lot of pressure on mitochondrial function. It also suppresses the immune system. Now, decreased glutathione synthesis and mitochondrial dysfunction are common in many of the diseases, especially if we look at autism and Down syndrome. So that will show you how important glutathione is. Vitamin C, as all of you all know, I don't think vitamin C has um, drawn so much of attention. Uh, in this way, I should say thank you to COVID, because the awareness of a healthy lifestyle, healthy diet, and vitamin C and other antioxidants have grown so much among the public that vitamin C stocks at one point in time, it was out, just the empty shelves. So that means so many people were buying vitamin C, so many people are consuming vitamin C, yet it is not mentioned at all, zero, by WHO, by FDA, by NIH, not by our ministry, of course, and um, none of them, and the media. I had many of my videos, as well as so many of my colleagues in the ISOM. As soon as we mention vitamin C or vitamin D or zinc, magnesium, anything to do with COVID and better health, the YouTube and Facebook, they block. So this is how criminal it can get. So this is, there is a big agenda hidden behind all this. But it is important to recognize that if you have enough antioxidants, you are not only going to kill this COVID or any other viruses, but you are going to protect your mitochondria, the source of energy itself. And the evolution itself depended on energy. So it is time we pay attention to mitochondria, and especially to vitamin C, because vitamin C is a small molecule, easily diffusible into any cell, because it uses the same transport mechanism like glucose. And it can donate 2 electrons per molecule, in unlike other antioxidants, which is only 1 to 1. And it can regenerate other antioxidants like glutathione, and the benefits are numerous. But a combination of glutathione and vitamin C works beautifully. Okay. A point to remember is this. Please understand this very basic fact. I mentioned to you that high carbohydrate diet creates a lot of oxidative stress, which is not good for mitochondria. Now, if you have vitamin C and glucose in your blood, which do you think your cell will take? It will take the glucose. So people who eat a high carb diet, even if they take vitamin C, the regular dose, you can still be deficient. So if you want to eat high carbohydrate diet for whatever reasons you believe in that, or because you can't give up your love for sugar and all the high carb diets, then at least try to take vitamin C uh, in a larger quantity. And you may want to take it, if you can, take ascorbic acid at least in an empty stomach when it does not compete with your sugar. So you'll get it into yourself. Okay. It also provides hydrogen ion for the conversion of ascorbic acid to DHEAA, dehydroascorbic acid. Ascorbic acid is the reduced form. DHAA is the oxidized form, but it can be recycled. That's the beauty of vitamin C. It recycles itself. Mitochondria can use DHAA, so it provides an hydrogen ion. So that's another benefit of vitamin C. Improves the electron flow in the ETC. Very versatile in protecting mitochondrial membrane lipids. So the dose is 1 to 2 grams 3 times a day or more. We all know the optimum dose for adults is minimum of 6 grams. Many people who have taken 10 grams or more have lived much, much healthier life. Magnesium is another very critical nutrient. It's very important for ATP generation, very important to optimize mitochondrial function. Many of the steps in Krebs cycle need magnesium. It is also necessary for 3 of the 5 complexes in the ETC, that means generation of ATP. This is why when you give magnesium, there is improvement in energy. Now, very interesting point about magnesium is this. Once you have already produced ATP in the mitochondria, the transfer of ATP from mitochondria into the cytoplasm, where the rest of the cellular function takes place, requires magnesium. So if you are deficient in magnesium, your generation of ATP is going to be low. Whatever you produce is going to be less available in the cytoplasm. So this is why magnesium is very, very important. Deficiency is extremely common, extremely common. Lethargy, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, migraine, hypertension are some of the examples. Because magnesium is involved in at least 800 enzymatic reactions in the body, the list is just only a very few of the examples I'm giving. So magnesium is very critical. So what I tell my patients anyway, the dose is 500 milligrams at least twice a day for most of us. Unless you are taking a multivitamin, which is also magnesium, you may want to take it once a day. The way I advise my patients about supplements is this, which I've mentioned to you all before. I divide into basic and special, so easier. So the basic would be multivitamin, omega-3 fish oil, and the glutathione precursor. Okay, because in the multivitamin, a good quality multivitamin, you have magnesium, vitamin C, and vitamin D3. My advice to my patients is if they can afford, they add on C, magnesium, and D3. If they can't, limit to these 3. So this is how you should look at basic vitamins. So whenever possible, give additional magnesium, vitamin C, and vitamin D3 as well. Ubiquinone, commonly known as CoQ10, this is a reduced form of CoQ10. It's a fat-soluble molecule, which is extremely important for the ETC, complexes 1 to transport of electrons from complexes 1 to 3, 1 and 2 to 3. Maintains stability of complex 3. It acts as an antioxidant. I mentioned to you about bilipid layer and cardiolipin. Increases ATP. This is why when you give it to someone with congestive cardiac failure, or someone who has lethargy, chronic fatigue syndrome, they feel much better. Reduces lactic acid levels. So it's very important in someone who exercises regularly. Counteracts the negative effects of statins and chemo drugs. Very important point to remember. The dose is 100 milligrams TDS. It's expensive for some patients, so either you take daily BD or TDS. If you want to optimize, then it's TDS. L-acetyl carnitine is another substrate that is necessary to transport the fatty acids in the mitochondrial matrix for beta oxidation. It can also neutralize the reactive oxygen species, bind to iron so it does not become an oxidative agent, protects mitochondria from oxidative damage caused by aging, ischemia, inflammation, cancers, drugs, etc. Detoxifies also environmental toxins and reduces the side effects of statins. The dose is 250 to 500 milligrams BD. Of course, if you are using carnitine, the dose can be higher. The difference is acetyl L-carnitine as compared to L-carnitine, it crosses the blood-brain barrier better. So for some physicians would just prefer to use carnitine. Alpha lipoic acid is a wonderful supplement for mitochondrial health. It is both water and fat soluble. So that makes it very unique because it protects the mitochondrial membrane and it also protects the cytoplasm. So it is important to have lipoic acid if you want mitochondrial correction. It increases membrane potential by 50% and oxygen consumption within 2 weeks it can increase if you give the adequate dose. Important for mitochondrial oxidative decarboxylation reaction, and it has mitochondrial resuscitation. That means an ischemic mitochondria or mitochondria that needs to be regenerated, biogenesis. Alpha lipoic acid will be useful. The dose is 300 milligrams twice a day. Whatever dose that I've put here is all for optimum health. Omega-3 fatty acids, all of you all are very familiar. It's anti-inflammatory. It protects the cell membrane, prevents a decrease in cardiolipin content. That is important. Important also for mitochondrial membrane restoration. That means if you have mitochondrial membrane damage, omega-3 will repair, reduces the mitochondrial calcium levels. The dose is 1 to 2 grams BD to TDS. I'm always very generous with omega, but of course not in toxic doses. Many people are afraid of thinning of blood and the risk of bleeding when they take omega-3. And so the standard dose is 1 to 2 grams, 2 to 3 times a day doesn't cost this. You need to take many times of this dose. So what I used to do in obstetric practice is a minimum of 4 grams a day, and unfortunately many obstetricians advise patients to stop it at 36 weeks because of the risk of bleeding, which is actually not correct. And whenever I see a growth retardation, I increase to 6 to even 12 grams. And when I give them sufficient amounts of omega-3, within 2 weeks, there is an improvement in fetal growth. That is how important it is for health. So fetal growth means the baby has more energy to increase in size. You remember I said developmental growth will be also affected if you have mitochondrial dysfunction. Now, the B complexes, all of them are very important, especially B1, B2, B3, and B5. You will have the slides. I have the doses and the functions of these B vitamins. So you have B1, which is very important. B2 is also very important for mitochondrial health. Then you have niacin, which I've mentioned before, and the doses are here. Phospholipids, I've mentioned, you need antioxidants as well as phospholipids. Taking a mix for phospholipids would be useful, and the dose is 1 to 2 grams 3 times a day. Vitamin E, it's a fat-soluble antioxidant. You need it, but always remember, you need to take the mix tocopherols and tocotrienols, and the dose should be 400 milligrams at least, taken once a day. If you can take 400 milligrams BD or twice a day, it would be better. PQQ is a very unique supplement. There is evidence to show that PQQ can help in mitochondrial biogenesis. It also helps to modify cell signaling and support mitochondrial function, reduce the oxidative damage. It's an expensive supplement. So there are many other supplements that we can take: NADH, resveratrol, D-ribose, citrate, arginine, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, ozone therapy, IV laser therapy, and don't forget the hormones, thyroid hormones, and melatonin. Okay, and there are herbs to support mitochondrial function like rhodiola and schisantha. A little bit of information on AMPK versus metformin. Metformin does its function mainly through activation of AMPK. AMPK is the master regulator of your metabolism. So it's necessary, it's the switch that helps you to burn your fuel. So metformin activates AMPK, but metformin does not inhibit insulin or mTOR. Only AMPK does. Okay, so you have to weigh the benefits. AMPK activates mitochondria, helps to protect from mitochondrial dysfunction, inhibits insulin and inhibits mTOR. Okay, and it also initiate mitophagy, whereas metformin, the function is to activate AMPK. No function, no benefits on insulin, mTOR, or mitophagy or autophagy. So how do you increase AMPK? You can take it as a supplement, or you can do regular fasting. Statins and mitochondria, it's worth mentioning. Unfortunately, still widely prescribed. It reduces your CoQ10 synthesis. I mentioned to you just now how important CoQ10 or ubiquinone is. It can also cause abnormality in the mitochondrial morphology, decreases ATP production, decreases membrane potential, and increase mitochondrial apoptosis. Now, these are the warnings that should be mentioned in the prescription or the label of what you call statins. But unfortunately, you don't see. Whereas there will be a lot of comments about vitamin C causing kidney stone, and don't let Dr. Selvam talk about vitamin C, block his videos, don't let him talk about mitochondria. So coming back to where I started. In the last 11 years, the emphasis has always been finding a cure by treating the root cause. So you have to shift your focus to not only the cellular level. Now you will understand how important mitochondria is. You have to shift your focus to the subcellular level, the mini organ level, the organelles. Okay? And leave the genetic, because that's a small portion. You need to keep that in mind. But as I mentioned, a lot of much better preconception healthcare will even reduce this. So from genetic and cellular, the focus should be at the subcellular level. When you look at this microscopic view and you consider the organelle and the communications, you will not miss a point. You will definitely treat the root cause. If you focus on the organs, then you will not heal. So find the right level, find the root cause, and connections is just looking at your Google map for your exact location. Treat the underlying causes, and remember, only orthomolecular molecules can cure or heal. When I say orthomolecular, that means any molecule that is part of you and me. That means it's natural. Only orthomolecular. So anything else that is not orthomolecular, that is not part of your cell, then it is not natural to you. And there can be no effective healing. Okay, since we can't hug and we can't shake hands, so let me say namaskar. Okay, now I'll take any questions.
Yes, such a nice presentation, Doc. Um,
Yes, Sofian.
yeah, thank you so much. I learned a lot. I learned a lot. You mentioned before that in terms of mitochondrial biogenesis, at least there are three pathways or three methods: fission, fusions, and mitophagy.
Mm.
Okay. First, could you please elaborate briefly with regards to fission and fusion, how we can do that? And for the purpose of mitochondrial density, meaning that if we want to increase the density of our mitochondria in the cells, which pathway do you think is the best? Fission, fusion, or mitophagy using intermittent fasting? Thanks.
Fusion and fission,
Yeah.
they need to be balanced, and this is through cell signaling. I mentioned to you that mitochondria, through reactive oxygen species, ROS, controls the cell signaling. And mitochondria, if you look at all the organelles, the mini organs that I mentioned, probably the most intelligent mini organ that you have and I have is our mitochondria. It is so intelligent that it can sense what is needed within the cell and in other cells. So if there is a need to have more mitochondria, then the fission will be initiated. If
Okay.
you need a larger mitochondria, then the fusion will be initiated. And of course, aging, whenever you can't prevent aging of mitochondria. Mitochondria in energy dense organs, they have a shorter half-life. And those that are not so energy dense, they have a longer half-life. Once the mitochondria has reached the lifespan, then you have mitochondria that will actually signal mitophagy.
Mhm, mhm.
So to reuse the components. So which is important for mitochondrial density depends on what is the signal depending on the cell requirements. So how does actually fasting control this? When you have fasting, how does your mitochondria becomes so first you improve mitochondrial function, you do repair and rejuvenation, you improve mitochondrial biogenesis, basically because you are consuming less energy to burn food for energy and use whatever energy that you have in the body for repair and regeneration. And it can be for mitochondria itself. And fasting directly influences mitochondrial biogenesis and function. Fasting also acts through activation of AMPK. And AMPK stimulates autophagy. But I mean, mitophagy is still autophagy.
Okay. Okay. Um, can we still ask you some questions?
Yeah, Sophia.
Okay. With regards to the use of acetyl L-carnitine,
Mm-hmm.
it mentions on the slide it will directly transport fatty acid
Mm.
into mitochondrial matrix for beta oxidation.
Yes.
My question is, can we do this even though we are not in ketogenic diet states and we don't do this intermittent fasting. Let's say if I just take acetyl L-carnitine, can we induce these beta oxidations? I mean, to create the ketone bodies in my liver using lipolysis pathway?
You can, but then I'm not very sure how much of ketone bodies you will produce unless you go on keto diet or very low carb diet for a long period of time. But the primary function of acetyl L-carnitine or L-carnitine is to transport the fatty acids for beta oxidation. Then why this is important is because I would prefer, for energy purposes, I would prefer beta oxidation, which has no smoke or free radicals, as opposed to glucose. So does that make L-carnitine an important uh, component of the mitochondrial correction list? Yes. So even if I'm eating a normal, very low carb diet, it will still help because I'll burn more fat and I burn fat more efficiently.
Okay. So transfers in this case, meaning it's coming from our, what do you call that, fat cells, the adipose tissue, or from our fat intake?
Either one, because either one, as long as you have fatty acids in the system, you need L-carnitine to transport the fatty acids into the mitochondrial matrix for beta oxidation.
Okay.
So this is what it does.
Yes. Thank you, Doc. Thank you. Okay.
You're welcome.
Anyone else has got questions for Dato? Please unmute your speaker, ask the question, and then mute your speaker back, please. Thank you.
Hello, Dato.
Yes, Vishnu Priya.
Yeah, so at the beginning of the slides, you explained about the lactic acid accumulation in the cells, right? When we exercise, and can you please explain like how does it affect the mitochondria, the high accumulation of lactic acid?
When you exercise, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. The energy, actually you create energy in the form of ATP. Okay. Now ATP is mostly produced in the mitochondria when you use glucose and use oxygen to burn for energy. So when you have mitochondria that is not functioning well, or if you overstretch yourself during exercise and you don't have enough substrate, say for example, you don't have enough glucose, then the mitochondria will be less able to support your energy demands through ATP. So the cytoplasm will take over the production of ATP, but cytoplasm will burn the glucose into lactic acid. So that is how you get more lactic acid with prolonged exercise. But that doesn't mean that you should put off exercise because you are likely to produce lactic acid. Okay. Now the meaning behind this is, if you have healthy mitochondria, it will switch back to your oxidative phosphorylation and creation of ATP. So once you have that, then your exercise recovery will be faster. If you have mitochondrial dysfunction or the damaged mitochondria, then more of your energy will come from the cytoplasm through lactic acid, fermentation of glucose, lactic acid. So that is not healthy on the long term because it can also initiate other changes.
Okay, thank you, Dato.
Okay.
Anyone else has questions?
Hello,
Yes.
Dr. Selvam.
Doc, you mentioned that, and I agree actually, excessively activating mTOR complex or mTOR phosphorylation, that's not good for our health, okay? But to maintain and preserve our muscle cells, our tissue and organs in a homeostatic state, then we still need to balance between catabolic pathway, the AMPK, and as well anabolic mTOR pathway. What's your opinion on this? Because we cannot always all the time using this catabolic pathway or the fasting, let's say.
Life and health is all about balance, Sophia.
Yes.
Extreme views generally they don't result in a positive outcome. So you see, protein is necessary. Anabolism is necessary to maintain muscle mass.
Okay.
So, but this is not to say that vegetarians are wrong in the choice of diet. But you can see the number of vegetarians who have chronic degenerative diseases, as well as obesity and many other problems. Basically, because the balance is lost when you don't have adequate intake of proteins. You have to choose the type of protein you take, and you have to make sure that all your amino acids are well balanced in a vegetarian diet, and it has to be in moderation. But what happens if you take a vegetarian diet with too much carbohydrates? You also have problems.
That's right.
You have too little protein, then you will have more catabolism. There is no anabolism. And when you lose your muscle mass, you lose your bone mass.
That's right. That's
and
right.
you lose your muscle mass, you are looking at only the muscle on the outside. Heart is also a muscle.
Yes, agreed.
So, and when you lose your muscle mass associated, you lose collagen. Collagen becomes a very important component of your body. So a balanced diet is, what I tell my patients is a very simple way of understanding, okay? My advice to my patients is take a variety of vegetables, colorful vegetables, and make this the major component of your diet. Say 60% of your diet is vegetable, which will give you a lot of good nutrients, provided they are organic, of course. And they also give you a lot of antioxidants. Then have your proteins from either animal source, usually it's eggs or fish, or from variety of nuts, beans, and peas, or avocado, and take it with some good fats like ghee or virgin coconut oil. So where does this leave the amount of carbohydrate? 10 to 15%. So this to me is in moderation. So you need the protein, especially aging people need protein.
That's right. That's right.
So you do not cut down the protein significantly because it actually stimulates mTOR. Nothing in the body is created without a good reason or a purpose. Everything is functional, but the balance is important. As you age, you reduce the amount of protein consumption, especially from meat, because of your digestive ability. You don't want to hyperphosphorylate mTOR. So you have a balanced diet. This is what I tell my patients. Once they are on the low carb diet, I will advise them to do then intermittent fasting.
Okay.
You cannot shift somebody from their high carb diet to even low carb diet. You need to have the transition, which takes about 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month. Give them the time. Bring them to a low carb diet, then advise them about intermittent fasting. Once they are comfortable with intermittent fasting, then you introduce water fasting. Maybe once a week water fasting, or once in 2 weeks. So all this with the type of diet I mentioned would be a more balanced way of looking at how you eat and what you eat.
Thank you. I agree totally with you. Relates to that questions, couple of times she mentions that low carb ketogenic diet is quite good for the healthy of our mitochondria, and I agree totally. But I just want to ask about the reason why. Is that because if we run this ketogenic diet, or if we implement ketogenic diet, then we can reduce the reactive oxygen species, the byproduct of our mitochondria, or because we can inhibit the mTOR pathway? Which one you think um, the main reasons why ketogenic diet is still the best up to now?
Actually, Sofyan, I'm not a proponent of ketogenic diet for a long period of time.
Of
If
course.
I advise my patients to switch to ketogenic diet, it could be for cancer patients for a month or two, or if they have a chronic metabolic disease, and helping them to actually quickly get into the healing phase. After that, I'll advise them to go on the low carb diet.
Yes.
Okay. Now the benefits mainly, in my opinion, is through a reduction in oxidative stress. Okay. And of course, if you take a ketogenic diet, provided you do not take a lot of protein, you also inhibit hyperphosphorylation of mTOR.
mTOR.
Yeah. But I think the primary reason would be reduction in oxidative stress.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe this is my last questions. In one slide, you mentioned that in healing-based healthcare, we should focus on subcellular level or the organelles, okay, not at the organs. I agree with that. And my question is, in the cell itself, there is not only mitochondria, but there are some other organelles such as reticulum endoplasmic, which has the function to protein making factory. Do we need to also take care of this organelle to avoid the so-called protein misfolding?
As I mentioned, nothing in the body is created by nature without a function.
Of course.
Okay. I'm trying to address the health concerns and how we can modify what we see and what we suffer from premature aging and diseases from energy point of view, which makes a lot of sense if you look at how the body is supported with energy, how the evolution has helped us to organize ourselves into compartments and organs and system and communication. Everything is linked to energy.
Okay.
So the order of importance, I'm not saying the rest are not important. Order of importance, I would put mitochondria as the top on the list, because that is the source of energy, and energy is creation itself. So if you lack energy, then there is, how does your rest of the mini organs function? They all need energy. So paying attention to mitochondria as well as all other organelles is important, but mitochondria plays a huge role, especially with the recent evidence in cell signaling and all other functions, controlling inflammation, making the necessary adaptive responses and compensatory responses. Mitochondria is very, very critical for health, and it is probably the most intelligent organelles.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Doc. Thank you. So
Okay.
Okay, anyone else with any questions?
Hello, Dr. Selvam. I want to ask.
Hello?
Hello.
Yes.
Yes.
Elizabeth?
Yes, doctor. Would you please explain about water fasting and how water fasting can affect the mitochondria? And my second question is how we can do water fasting in the right way? Thank you.
So how water fasting helps in mitochondria? Okay. Now, basically, when you stop eating, you don't have food to metabolize, then there is a lot of rest for the mitochondria. Oxidative stress is damaging, and of course, when you don't you fast, you save your enzymatic function, you don't have digestive issues, and you intake of chemicals and pesticides, everything gets less, so you just rest the mitochondria. So fasting the intermittent fasting is not total fasting. Intermittent fasting is you eat for 8 hours, preferably, and 16 hours you just have, you can drink water, you can have your herbal tea, green tea, black coffee, those things, lemon juice, lime juice, those are fine. That is intermittent fasting. But the intermittent fasting itself is good enough for mitochondrial regeneration, overall systemic health, because after 12 hours, repair and regeneration happens. In water fasting, you do not eat, you only drink water, because you can do dry fasting without even water, but that's generally not recommended for beginners, because if you do not drink water, then you may not be able to excrete all the toxins through the urine. So you need to drink water for renal excretion of toxins, because when you rest the body, you will detoxify. So the water fasting is, you can do it for more than 12 hours, up to 24 hours. You can have people who do that for even 3 days or 5 days. But don't go to extremes. My advice is, if you want to try water fasting, do for 12 to 16 hours. Say, for example, or it may be longer. So you have your dinner. If you're on low carb diet, you finish your dinner at 6 p.m. Okay. Next day, you are supposed to start your breakfast at 10 a.m. You skip breakfast, skip lunch, then you go on to only the dinner meal. That means 6 p.m. the previous day to 6 p.m. of this day. That is 24 hours. You're only on drinks and preferably water. So some people, once they get used to it, they'll go on water fasting even the following day. But don't do it for prolonged periods unless you're used to. All this will help in the mitochondrial regeneration and repair.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay.
Doctor, one more last question, if anybody else.
Yes, Dr.
Okay,
Liao.
Dr. Liao.
Datuk, there's been a conflicting opinion regarding IV glutathione in cancer patients. Is it safe for us to give IV glutathione for cancer patients?
Okay, how does vitamin C helps in cancer? Besides, there are numerous mechanisms. When you look at the antioxidant properties of vitamin C, in cancer, you need a pro-oxidant approach. So when vitamin C is infused as rapidly as possible, usually over a period of about an hour or so, it has a pro-oxidant property. It generates hydrogen peroxide. That is necessary for killing the cancer cells. This is the function of vitamin C. Why it is advised, it was supposed to be, the glutathione, why is not supposed to be good for cancer patients as an antioxidant is, you want the pro-oxidant activity to kill cancer cells. That's the purpose of using vitamin C besides all other functions. Okay. When you give glutathione, it's an antioxidant which is supposed to neutralize the vitamin C's pro-oxidant action.
Oh.
So this is the reason. So what actually you can do, it's not that you can't give glutathione for a cancer patient. No, that's not correct. Because glutathione has many other functions that vitamin C can't do. It can detoxify the toxins and chemicals and drugs from your system. It can stimulate your NRF2 antioxidant system that stimulates your catalase and SOD. All these are additional functions. It can also help to regenerate other antioxidants, especially vitamin C. So they are very symbiotic in the action, but each has its own major benefits. So the way some people will do, say you want to use glutathione is, you use at least a few hours, that if you want to give IV, at least 2 hours before your vitamin C infusion, or minimum at least 2 hours after the vitamin C infusion, so that you do not nullify the pro-oxidant effect of vitamin C.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
But if it is not practical, then you just skip that 1 day of antioxidant. You don't give IV. but try not to give it together with vitamin C, either as a bolus or adding to the drip at the end of the infusion of vitamin C. Try not to do that. 2 hours before, 2 hours after. On other days, it's still fine.
For all non-cancer patients, we can give them together, right?
Yes, non-cancer patients, it's fine. It's fine. That's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, Tati.
Okay, is there any more questions or can we end the day? All right, thank you. Just
Okay.
an announcement before you go off. Please remember that tomorrow we have another session at 7 p.m. Malaysian time and 6 p.m. Jakarta time and also Cambodia time. And the topic will be on biology of aging by Dr. Patana from Thailand. So everybody, thank you for joining in for tonight's webinar. And I'll see you all tomorrow then. Good night. Thank you,
Okay.
Dato.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Okay, Sati, thank you very much, Sati.
You're welcome, Dato. See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye.